Hey, welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated. It is a pleasure and a bit surreal to be joined today by Rob Schneider, who I'm most familiar with for getting me in a good amount of trouble when I was a kid. So, Rob, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm amazed that Disney made those movies back in the day. Or, I guess it was a more gentle time, or it was a time that people didn't take things so extreme. And I think I was very lucky to be able to make those silly movies when I was young at that time. Before social media became so judgmental.
Well, I think that social media might have helped me a little bit, and this is the one bone that I have to pick with you.
Tell me.
If you'll bear with me, I got in trouble. It was about 2005, and I was sitting at home, and I was watching The Hot Chick because it was on, and my dad came in, and it was the scene where you were licking the whipped cream out of the coffee cup, and he took one. My dad, grizzled old Midwestern factory worker, takes one look at the TV, takes one look at me, and says, "Son, what the are you watching?"
Wow.
And my dad, he had some concern. That's always the scene parents walk in.
You know what I
mean?
say about your dad? That is a very good father. He was right. He should have taken that video cassette out at that moment and cracked it in front of you and said, "Don't you dare be have your mind poisoned by this garbage comedy." Well, I will say that, like, it's tough to come in on that scene. Is your dad still with us?
Yeah, absolutely. And we ended up watching it later when I was in high school, and it's very funny.
It is funny. I mean, it's silly. Silly is king, and we were really coming from an extreme silliness, which is the stuff that made me laugh. And the fact that it's people are still, it's still like the number, like in 2000 and what was like a couple of years ago, 2022, it was the second most popular movie on one of the platforms. I mean, that's pretty remarkable for something that's 20 years old.
Right. And I think that one of the reasons that it's become so popular is people have started taking the weirdest things so aggressively seriously. And you point this out pretty well in your new book, You Can Do It. And I think that you talk about how the satirists have always been the most in touch with people because they take things that people are taking just so seriously. And it's like, lighten up, take a deep breath and stop treating everything as though it's just the end of the world and we have to prosecute you for it. It's just ridiculous.
But it is becoming that, where they really are getting prosecuted for it. There was I don't know if he's a comedian, but he's a comic guy who was on YouTube that had his dog doing the Heil Hitler salute, which it seems, well, maybe definitely in bad taste. It didn't seem to be something so egregious that it required the police to come to his house and arrest him. Yet that is what happened.
Yeah, it's not like it was a German Shepherd or anything either.
Right.
I got to tell you.
You have to separate that. What kind of dog is it? I mean, did the dog know? Had the dog been exposed to this hate media and hateful diatribes by Adolf Hitler? It's I think what happens is it's a reflexive time. And I don't know, I just had to make that assumption, Tony, that in the 1970s, things would continue to be more open and more liberal. And I was shocked by the kind of rubber band slap to the face, which happened around the 1980s when the Republicans were in office. And all of a sudden, there seemed to be a slight attack on comedy. Nothing like's happened recently, but there was definitely that famous case, which I talk about in the book, The People versus Larry Flynt, which went all the way to the Supreme Court. And what's interesting about that, because and for your readers who are not familiar with that, Jerry Falwell, which is a very was a very consequential figure in around 1980. During that conservative Republican Reagan era, was very popular, and that's what helped raise Reagan to power. And then there was the most, I would say, the rawest and most obscene of all of the girly mags was Hustler in its day, and they did a cartoon of Jerry Falwell in a sexual romp with his uh, mother in an outhouse. Now, while that,
Hmm.
most people would find that, unfunny, offensive, is it illegal? And that is the case where that is an extreme thing. And what the Supreme Court did rule, and I think rightly so, was would the average person, irregardless of taste, irregardless of its intended humor or harm, would the average person find this to be something that was not believable? And
Right.
so it's important that the Supreme Court made that decision because they were taking out taste, and they were also not concerned about its comedic, whether it was funny or not. And I would say that that we have not that social media in our society has moved away from that decision, which again I think was a correct decision, and we've come to a place where now we are deciding to silence those we disagree with, um, and it's because of their political affiliation more than anything, and
It's
that's
not even the nature of the joke. It's just whether someone has an R next to their name. Oh man, you can't be making jokes like that. And they send in the feds. It's getting
yeah.
ridiculous.
Well, I do think we need to be. It's like we need, if vaccines ever worked, and I question that whole theology, and we have a whole, and I know that's a fundamental belief issue that Western civilization is trying to deal with now, especially now that that question can be openly talked about in my book and in society after what happened during the COVID scam, where we knew for sure, and doctors knew for sure that there was cures and that there was existing meds that like hydrochloroquine, um, like ivermectin, and there was 25 actually. Now, um, but the only way to get this emergency authorization um, from the government was to say that there was none and to silence all those. To get that,
Hmm.
what the government narrative was to get behind the pharmaceutical companies, which incidentally uh, pay for the FDA, and they pay the biggest contributor to our Congress, to the Senate, to people in the House of Representatives, to our state legislatures, and they killed it, and so that's not freedom, and that isn't. It is a form of tyranny. So we really have to. We've seen that now, and so what we really do need is to re-energize this freedom of speech. And it's a weird way of saying it for somebody who's been so vocal against the pharmaceutical cartel, which is the real drug cartel. We need an inoculation of free speech again. We need to recharge it because it is the First Amendment for a reason. Even before the founding fathers put in guns, they said, "Well, the real the real way to fight tyranny, even more powerful than guns, is our own voice and our own voice of opposition and dissent. Dissent the is the foundation of democracy, and our republic demands it."
I think that we're coming to I want to get your thoughts on this because I've noticed over the last year or so when you've had like Jerry Seinfeld and some other comedians that have come out and like kind of lightly pushed back against how serious things are getting. Oh, people are being canceled for everything. Maybe this is getting a little ridiculous. And the questions that I had, although I appreciate a lot of those guys coming out and saying this, is that I remember a lot of people losing careers and God knows how many jobs in the entertainment industry and the what are the journalists, the news, the media community and things because they said something or they asked a question that was considered too inappropriate. And instead of saying, well, look, this is why this is believed and you kind of disagree with them, it's immediately bringing out the axe, the old two-handled executioner's axe.
Yes, instead of killing somebody, beheading them like they did after France put in their free speech, which was in I think 1789, um, the rights of man and of the citizen, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, 1789. to 1793. It was a 4-year period, and then they returned where it was free speech, and then they returned by 1793 and cutting people's heads off again.
Mhm.
But what was that? Whereas the United States, when we, freed ourselves from the Brits, what we didn't do was we didn't free ourselves from the rule of law. We didn't change the property rights. So that was an important foundation that we decided to hang on to. So what we're seeing now is we're going back to a different form of killing somebody, and you can wipe them out what difference is it really if you could destroy somebody's career, their livelihood, their reputation? And like there was a weatherman in Sacramento. I don't know. I think he was a
Mhm.
sportscaster or a weatherman. I'm sorry. I believe he was a sportscaster for 30 years up in Sacramento, and he said during the Black Lives Matter, which has turned into which is property in the Bahamas matter, which is what they were
Yeah.
looking to buy. And I mean, even Coca-Cola last December quietly took Black Lives Matter off of their website.
Yeah, everybody's scrubbing it out now that it's not really making them any money anymore.
And he said that the criminal sin of saying at that time, all lives matter. And for that, his 30 years of work for that particular channel was wiped out. He was fired. He was ruined. And no apologies have been made. He's not gotten his job back. And it's absolutely devastating. So you really have the 21st century version of the Salem witch trials. I mean, I don't know any other way to look at it.
So that's what I want to get at here. And I think that's one of the questions that I got to the end of your book, and I thought, excellent, I agree. So now what about this? That being, we get to the end of this, and yeah, there are a lot of people that have been burnt at the stake. A lot of people have been under the guillotine, as you said. But some of the guys that are out there talking now, and I got to point to Seinfeld and saying, isn't this just a bit much? Where is the question for the weathercaster or the sportscaster that you talked about? What about who's asking questions about how do we salvage the people?
Well,
how do we rebuild and restore the people who were given the axe in society? I don't see anyone asking, what do we do for the guy who did lose his entire career?
Well, I'm writing some notes here. What we have to do now is, believe it or not, the Republicans are now the voice of the people. Now, whether that continues when they regain power, if they regain power, we'll see. But at this point, you can say that the average person that is the Republicans are speaking to them. The average person doesn't want higher taxes. The average person wants freedom of speech. The average person doesn't want boys in their girls' dressing rooms or locker rooms or playing against them in sports.
Very radical ideas you're proposing.
Exactly, something that, but when you have a controlled media, and when I say controlled, I mean captured, and it's ideologically captured. And I tell people, which they understand it very quickly. I said, the liberal intelligentsia, which isn't anything but liberal these days. I mean, they own Facebook, and Zuckerberg admitted just last week that Facebook did kneel and take the knee for government to let them censor and silence those who oppose the government.
Even in comedy ways, completely censored.
We have, but so they have Facebook, which is Instagram, which is, and then they also have the Google search engine. If you go to I talk about my book, you can do it, Dr. Robert Epstein, and talking about the algorithms that when they suppress information on Google search engine, when they suppress conservative issues, what they can do is they can actually change elections by it's an astounding amount of percentage points. It's not small, and it did affect the 2020 election. So when you go down this road, you really are opening up a road to tyranny. So, but getting back to your question, I mean, what's going to have to happen is there's going to be, just like in South Africa, you're going to have some sort of peace and reconciliation. And what needs to happen is you have to have some form. And I don't want to put people in jail, but I want them to be able to confess. I mean, I want them to be able to talk about what their government did. And
You want there to be
I
accountability.
want there to be some sort of accountability, and I want them to be a peaceful process where you can start over. And what's happening when you have Google, when you have the tech companies, we have ABC, NBC, CBS, ABC, MSNBC, Google search engine that needs to be broken up. If they thought the Bell long distance companies were too powerful, then what are we doing with Google search engine?
Antitrust stuff. I hear you.
And so and what do conservatives have? I say this to people. I say we have one news channel and a guy that sells pillows. So I mean, we really, until we break the hegemony of this illiberal liberal onslaught that has just besieged us, and thank God and pray for Elon Musk that Twitter is our one and only the free speech beacon in the world, and thank God for him for caring so much about continuing this process of, which is the quintessential, to American society, and what has been the cornerstone of freedom and the beacon call of freedom around the world is free speech. No one is swimming to get to Cuba. No one is crossing the borders to get into South America.
You mean you haven't booked your Venezuelan vacation package yet? Come on, man.
At the same time, I think that the United States should not just continue to undermine these countries, even if they are going against some of our core principles. I think we need to build up countries, even the ones we disagree with. And the United States, while the United States hates the China and Russia, very, very little impact, by the way, as was proved that the Russia did not have a hand in the 2016 election. They had maybe 200 bot accounts or stuff, and it did nothing. It was a blip.
Yeah, but hey, Merrick Garland says they're coming after this election, and they're coming in full force, and they're doing all this stuff. He had this whole big news conference, and then this morning, I don't know if you saw that Putin endorsed Kamala Harris for president.
Wow!
So can't wait to see Merrick Garland's big home run statement following that his boss has been endorsed.
Well, I mean, she's a communist, so it makes total sense.
Hey, her VP honeymooned in China. I mean, who hasn't honeymooned in a communist country? I mean, come on.
I did.
That's a day ending in Y.
I honeymooned in Hong Kong, but that's because I remember it when it wasn't China.
I was going to say, yeah, that was back when it was the last beacon of British.
Yeah, that's another thing we can get into sometime. The handball and how they screwed that up. But look, I do think, like I was getting to, the point was the Republicans need to put on their big boy pants, and we need to pass legislation when any state district attorney who's obviously running on the platform like the DA in Georgia and the DA in New York City to go after a political opponent of the Democratic regime. At this point, it's just the blue monster, that we need to have legislation that automatically bumps that up to the Fed, not to dismiss the charge outright.
Interesting.
But I think you automatically you would bump it up. And there's already some legislation. I talked to I didn't talk to the legislature and the congressman in Oklahoma, but that's floating around now. And I'm going to push that in this next legislation. This next administration. That needs to happen. And I think Trump will go for it because he didn't prosecute Hillary Clinton, though, there was something to that. But I think that the Democrats have obviously crossed the Rubicon here, and it's to attacking and imprisoning their political rivals, which is very unique and really hasn't happened since the Woodrow Wilson administration, where Woodrow Wilson and the Sedition Act really was to just go after. I mean, the Sedition Act, if you want to know what that really was to go after. He ran on a platform of, he kept us out of war and then put us directly in the war, and then put a temporary income tax, which ended up being 110 years later, we're still dealing with it. And so he was a liar, and he was a real progressive, and he was a con man. And then he, very similar to Biden, was no longer cognitively able to run the country, and somebody else did. And I think it was his wife. I think her name was Edith or something. And I don't think,
yeah.
So I mean, so it's a cycle. But I do think that Republicans need to step up and stop this political warfare. And I hope they will.
I hope they will too. I'd love to say that I'm cautiously optimistic, but I think I'll have to quote what you said earlier. We'll see, kind of a thing. I really do. Rob Schneider, it's been a joy having you on. I wish that you and I had the time to dig into.
Let's do it again. Let's do it again sometime. Get on. Let's do it. I mean, I'm sorry I got all these other interviews, but you asked some very interesting questions, Tony, and it does require.
Well, thanks.
It does require.
Just trying not to waste your time.
It does require, but I would just say that my book is an edutainment. I want people to laugh, and it's a historical book, and it's for people like myself with low attention spans, but also to increase their interest, so that if I do in some way, if the You Can Do It book, Speak Your Mind America, is able to pique their interest, that they can perhaps continue that in different ways in their own, what they find interesting, and to continue to question the government narrative and question whether silencing dissent, and it could reinforce the idea that silencing dissent is not American, and we need to move forward.
Absolutely.
In a way that's a free flow of ideas.
Amazing that you would write a book to be read. When so many times I feel like I'm cracking open a book just because the author wanted to talk. Very different of perspective. We'll chat about that soon. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back in just a minute. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on the Daily Signal, now nationally syndicated, first on 93 WIBC.